And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Mike Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. And this podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And in episode 75, we're going to talk about something that maybe is at the heart of the wellness paradox. And this relates to the recent conference put on by the White House on hunger, nutrition, and health. Now, you may have heard about this. It was held in the last week of September. So you're hearing this podcast a couple weeks after that. And I rarely like to do 2 weeks in a row on the podcast where I'm the one doing the talking, because I truly believe the Wellness Paradox is a platform for other people to talk about all the amazing things that they're doing to solve the paradox. But given the report that was put out by the Biden-Harris administration after this conference, I felt compelled to have a conversation around its contents. Now, on the show notes page, which can be found at wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 75, you'll see the 44-page PDF that was published by the White House on this event. And I strongly encourage everyone to read it. It really talked through a lot of very, very salient and important public health issues, largely around hunger and food insecurity in our country, which is a major issue that most definitely needs to be addressed, but is certainly outside of the scope of my expertise as well as the Wellness Paradox podcast. But what is squarely within my scope and expertise is the fourth pillar of the report. And the fourth pillar, and I'll read this for those of you that maybe don't have the report right in front of you or don't want to go out and read it, is to support physical activity for all. And they define that as make it easier for people to be more physically active, in part by ensuring that everyone has access to safe places to be active, increasing awareness of the benefits of physical activity, and conduct research on and measures of physical activity. So that pillar sounds like it's right in the wheelhouse of everyone who listens to the Wellness Paradox. Now, as I was reading through this report, and I'm going through the fourth pillar, I kept reading and reading and reading, waiting for, at some point, the fitness industry to be mentioned as part of the infrastructure that could support pillar number 4. And there was not one mention of our industry in this White House report. And I was kind of taken aback by it, because we've came a long way over the course of the past several years through the COVID-19 pandemic. We now have representation at the federal level through a lot of the great work that IRSA and the National Health and Fitness Alliance are doing. We have representation at state level governments, such as here in Michigan with the Michigan Fitness Club Association and the other state alliances around the country. So we've came a long way. But if we needed a very salient and tangible reminder of how far we still have to go, it's this report. The fact that a conference was convened on health, and one of the pillars of this conference and its findings was that physical activity needs to be supported for all, and our industry wasn't mentioned in the report. That's a massive wake-up call for how far we have to come in order to be considered part of the public health infrastructure in this country and part of the healthcare delivery system. Now, we're going to get into what I think could be kind of, taking from the report and their concept of pillars, 3 pillars that our industry can think about with regard to really becoming a more viable part of that public health infrastructure. And I'm going to get to that towards the middle and end of this podcast. But I do want to touch on some of the things that the report found, because I think these are valid and important things for us to be considering as an industry when we really look at how we can support physical activity for all. So the report talks about built environments that promote physical activity. And I think these are critical to consider how we as an industry can support these built environments. So have that be parks, have that be playgrounds, not only how we can financially support those initiatives, but also how can we support with advocacy those type of initiatives? How can we support with programming those kind of initiatives? So I think built environment, and not just being the parks and green spaces, but also being sidewalks and communities that are easy for you to walk or roll in, critical to becoming more physically active. The report further went on to say to support robust and tailored physical education programs and promotion. And I think PE is something that we all think back to our youth in grade school and high school. And many of us who are listening to this podcast probably enjoyed physical education class, but there were a whole host of people that we went to school with that would do anything to get out of PE or gym class. And unfortunately, physical education has largely been engineered out of our education curriculum broadly across this country. And I think that should serve as a little bit of a canary in the coal mine to our industry, because the members and clients of our facilities in the future are the youth of today. And if the youth of today aren't going to physical education classes and they're a less physically literate generation, that's going to shrink the market share for our industry in the future. So supporting physical education, I think, is absolutely critical at both the grade school and the high school level. We need a more physically literate population. The report further went on to say, talking about programs and messaging that resonate with specific demographic groups. We're going to get into that with some of the pillars that I'm going to talk about for solutions. And then facilitate physical activity in federal facilities, which the ability of our industry to partner with the federal government to provide solutions for physical activity and exercise inside of federal facilities, and by extension, we could even think of that in state facilities. I think that is a significant opportunity that we really need to consider how we leverage. And this section of the report ends with a call to action for a whole society response. And again, as I'm reading the report, I can tell you this is where I'm hoping that the fitness industry comes up at some point in time. And unfortunately, through none of these bullets did it come up. But just to go through kind of what they talked about in the report, first they talked about plans and proclamations to promote the CDC's Active People, Healthy Nation and the Complete Streets and Safe Route policy for school programs. So these are some policy level initiatives that at the very least, everyone who's listening to this needs to be educated on. And I'll link up to some of these in the show notes page. Free passes to state parks for children and families, particularly if this is a needs-based type of a program. I think this would be great to get people more access to green space. Increasing access to people with disabilities to exercise in local parks and workout facilities. Again, considering how we're serving the disabled population, and as that population grows over time and we're trying to be more inclusive as an industry, how do we assist them? Certainly one of the next calls to action that I touched on earlier, which I think is critically important, is the requirement of physical education in schools. Again, this is something that impacts the physical literacy of our youth. And these physically literate youth will become the members and the clients of tomorrow for our industry. And if they are physically illiterate, then they're not going to be walking through our doors in the future. The report further goes on to talk about correctional facilities, providing opportunities for exercise for persons in custody. Again, maybe that's an opportunity for us to partner on the federal or the state level. The report talked about workplace wellness, and I think this is an area that our industry has started to delve into a little bit. But again, can we consider how we could support this call to action for a whole society response? It talked about bike share programs and helping ensure that parks and safe sidewalks exist in all communities, not just the affluent communities, but particularly the underserved communities. And the last thing it talked about in terms of the whole response from society and the call to action was kind of the blending of public-private partnerships to come up with shared use agreements for spaces and sport facilities and fields to ensure people have multiple environments to be physically active in. So again, I think, very, very positive. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer here when I talk about this report and this attempt by the White House to bring together stakeholders from various parts of the nutrition, health, and public health communities to address some very, very important issues to the health of our nation. But what can't be understated is that these type of conversations are conversations that our industry must be inserted into if we are not only going to be economically viable for the long term, but more importantly, to the higher purpose of our industry, if we're ever going to help address population health in this country and all that ails it with regard to a lot of the chronic cardiometabolic diseases that exist. I mean, keep in mind, this country spends $1 in $5, 20% of its GDP on healthcare. And of that, 90% is spent on chronic diseases. So these are not infectious diseases. These are diseases of lifestyle, and have that be lifestyle be related to the choices you are making, such as the foods you're eating or the activity you're doing or not doing, or the choices that are made for you by the environment you're put in. Our industry can play a real role in tamping down those healthcare costs, which are only accelerating. But we are never going to be a part of that conversation if we don't have a seat at the table and a voice in these kinds of rooms and these kinds of conversations. Now, I will say the Physical Activity Alliance, which is working very, very hard for our industry with a bunch of amazing and passionate individuals, they were at this event. But clearly, their influence only went so far to including the different levers that could be pulled to improve physical activity. And for whatever reason, the powers that be, the people that authored this report, did not feel it was appropriate or accurate to include our industry. And again, I think this is a call to action for our industry that we have to be a part of these conversations. So I'd like to propose to everyone listening 3 primary pillars that we can be thinking of as an industry to be a part of these conversations. Now, in talking about these pillars, please realize I'm talking about the long game. This is not something that's going to happen in weeks or months or maybe even years. And this is why I do have hope for our industry, because although we weren't a part of this conversation and we weren't mentioned explicitly in the report, we've only been really focusing on advocacy and this broader approach to public health for a fairly short period of time in our industry. I mean, there are pockets of the industry that have been doing it for a couple of decades, but the industry in a whole really didn't make the shift until COVID. So the good news is that I think we are on the trajectory, but we need to be reminded of wake-up calls like this and conversations that we're not a part of. And so the first pillar that I want to talk about is the idea of broadening our perspective as an industry. And I'm going to ask you, when you think about broadening your perspective, instead of being zoomed into the narrowly focused industry that we've always been, which is serving 15 to 20% of the population, helping get the fitter, and just myopically focusing on our industry and its profitability and success, I think we need to broaden our perspective and start to say, well, if we want to be considered part of healthcare and part of public health, what exactly does that mean? And how do we start to think about these things? And I think that as soon as you say you want to be part of public health or you want to be part of healthcare, all of a sudden your focus shifts from kind of an internal focus to an others focus. So by broadening our perspective, we're starting to say, okay, man, if we want to be part of public health and we want to be part of healthcare because we want to influence population health and we want to help with the economic crisis that's caused by chronic cardiometabolic diseases, we need to think more broadly about everything we do. So the foundational pillar to these other 2 pillars I'm going to talk about is this broader perspective. we can't merely think of our industry as the quote unquote fitness industry anymore. No more than physical therapy would consider itself a separate industry from healthcare, or no more than athletic trainers would consider themselves separate from healthcare. They're all under the healthcare continuum. And again, to be less exercise or movement focused in my example, no more differently than nurses would not consider themselves part of the healthcare continuum. So we really have to be thinking that we are part of the healthcare continuum in this country. And as soon as you start to think like that and realize that and have it dictate your actions, absolutely everything changes on every single level of what you do. And thinking and acting and talking like we are part of healthcare is the first step to getting us a seat around that table. But again, thinking and talking only gets us so far. We absolutely need action. And the second pillar is actually the first action step, which is we need to become more credible as an industry. We have a massive credibility problem. By any definition of credibility, our industry does not have it. And I hate to say this, but it's our fault. We have caused this credibility issue on every single level. And I can go into a lot of depth and detail into the minutia of why I think we've caused this credibility issue and what its roots are. But I'm going to focus on some specific things primarily. I think the biggest issue with our credibility is we have, and going back to the lack of a broad perspective, we have always chased the dollar in the short term in our industry. And the dollar in the short term in our industry means, one, if getting the fit fitter is what we're good at, we focused on getting better at that. If playing on people's emotions and insecurity about their body and their weight is something that the public responds to in terms of marketing and actually spending, we have tried to capitalize on that from a business perspective. And I'm not saying that giving the marketplace what it wants is necessarily a bad thing, but every time our industry puts off a weight loss challenge out there, the evidence-based medical community looks at that and goes, well, there they go again, just trying to make a quick grab at some dollars. So this credibility issue that we have that we've created ourselves, we need to disentangle all of the factors that have caused it. And I think the first level that has to happen on, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it until enough people listen that it actually makes a difference, is that we have to change our messaging. We have to change our imagery. And I'm going to give some very, very specific actionable things here. First, in terms of messaging, I think the narrow messaging that our industry has put out around body composition and getting the beach bod, and getting the perfect glutes and the perfect arms, all of those things that are very myopically focused on how we look have to start to go away. They are subverting the long-term goals of our industry, and they're hurting our credibility, because the reality is, as exercise professionals, as an industry that focuses on exercise, we can't guarantee that someone is going to look differently if they exercise. We can guarantee they're going to be healthier. We can guarantee they're going to function differently, but we certainly can't guarantee that they're going to look any different, because that's a really, really complex physiological equation. And here's the thing, even if we could guarantee that people are going to look differently, the issue here is not an objective issue, it's a subjective issue. How people feel like they look, how their body image is to themselves, and for that matter to other people as they perceive it, is inherently subjective. So even if we objectively improved somebody's body composition, subjectively they might not feel any different. In fact, in some cases they might actually feel worse, particularly when you start to dig into the psychology of body image and weight stigma. So we have to really start to disassociate our messaging in our industry from body composition, and we have to broaden it. And we probably have to broaden it to not just general measures of overall physical fitness, health, and longevity, but if we were smart and if we looked at a lot of the research on behavior change and sustaining that change, we would realize that people function from an instant gratification perspective. And in order for us to see improved adherence and compliance in exercise programs, we need people to understand the immediate benefit of exercise, which has a lot more to do with things like energy and mental health than anything else. So if we were smart as an industry, and if we wanted to gain more credibility, we would start to shift our messaging subtly, and in some cases not so subtly, to less outcome oriented measures and more process oriented measures. But if nothing else, we have to move away from body composition based messaging. I think it would do our industry very well to eliminate all of that messaging and completely eliminate the weight loss challenges, the physique transformation challenges, the body composition challenges. Those are subverting our goal of being credible. As far as imagery goes, I've talked about this before, and again, it bears repeating. We have to image in our ads and on our website the people that we want to serve. And I believe if we're ever going to have a seat around the table for these type of conversations like we're held at the White House, if we're ever going to be a part of these white papers that have calls to action for society, we have to have people in our ads and on our websites. Our imagery has to be the 80% of the population we are not serving. A physician is not going to refer someone to a boutique fitness studio if the only people they see in the ads for that studio look nothing like their patients. They're just simply not going to do it. And the patient or the individual is not going to go to a fitness facility that no one looks like them on the website or on their marketing. It's just not going to happen. People want to go where they feel like they belong. And right now, 80% of our population does not feel like they belong in fitness centers. And that has been true now. It's been true for the past 50 years in our industries. We've always struggled to get outside of that 15 to 20% of the population. We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing that contributes to that? And the imagery is such a massive part of it. And so for those of you who are listening to this that have the ability to put out social media messaging, put out marketing, do things with your company's website, look at the imagery. Are you simply putting images up there of the beautiful people that we're already serving? Or is your imagery more inclusive? Is it more diverse? And is it suggesting that you serve a broader population? We're not going to change the status quo unless we change that. I know it seems so reductionistic to think that, man, like, is it really just about our imagery? And the answer is no, it's not just about our imagery, but it is a simple fix in practice that requires a larger, more complex fix in theory. And it all goes back to that elemental level of broadening our perspective. If we're just part of fitness, we can keep putting the fit people on our websites and we can keep messaging things that are associated with body composition and fitness. But if we're part of healthcare, we have to start to broaden. I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. Next is education. In terms of becoming more credible, our industry needs to become more educated. Right now, broadly speaking, in our industry, we are educated at the most anecdotal of anecdotal levels. And what I mean by that is the majority of our industry and the professionals that work in our industry are educated by what has worked best for them as an individual on their fitness journey. And that's a great starting point. It's the starting point that I used. But the problem is, if you want to serve a population that is not physically fit, is not physically literate, doesn't enjoy going to a fitness club, what works for you will never work for them. Certainly not from a programming perspective, but definitely not from a psychological and motivational perspective. So very, very quickly, the professionals in our industry absolutely must move to a higher tier of education. And we need to figure out a way to hold professionals in our industry accountable to that higher tier of education. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of professionals in our industry are very talented and very skilled at working with the physically fit. Again, we're great at getting the fitter. It's a theme of our industry and has been for decades. So consequently, the professionals in our industry are great taking somebody who is 15% body fat and making them 13% body fat or 12% body fat, or somebody who could bench 225, getting them to bench 250. We're very talented at helping people who are fit become fitter. What we lack a lot of talent, knowledge, and acumen around is taking somebody who is not at all fit, or maybe somebody who has a series of comorbidities or chronic diseases, and nurturing their fitness and their health to a point where they see a sustainable relationship with exercise throughout the course of their life. And I really, really think that it all boils down to education, committing to education on the side of the professional, but on the side of the industry, making sure that we hold our professionals accountable to the education they need to work with that 80% of the population that they are not currently working with or not currently serving. There needs to be accountability here. So this is a call to action for professionals that are listening, that are you only doing the education that helps get the fitter, or are you doing the education, both from a programming perspective and a coaching behavior change perspective, to actually support the 80% of the population that we're currently not working with? Where are you spending your education time? You can't expect to spend it on the fit and then be adequately prepared and competent to work with somebody who is sedentary, deconditioned, and has multiple comorbidities. But on the flip side, this is also a call to action to employers in our industry, that you need to provide environments and support to ensure your professionals that you employ are properly educated on the 80% that we currently don't serve in our industry. And you also need to hold them accountable, either through incentive structures or disincentive structures. And on some level, this change needs to happen. So I don't care if it's the carrot or the stick, but we have to figure out a way organizationally to imbue our professionals with a strong desire to continue to learn how to effectively work with that 80% of the population. And there are a lot of educational avenues that exist out there to do so. That's not the point of this discussion, to detail every single one of those education avenues. The point of this discussion is simply to say we have to become more educated as a profession. We absolutely have to. And then the last thing is just the overall, what I'll call, professionalism of our industry. And in the interest of not ruffling too many feathers, I would say much of what I see in our industry, at least the outward facing imagery, and this is a broad statement, so this is certainly not every professional. And in fact, there are many amazingly talented fitness professionals out there that do work with the 80%, and they're making a profound difference in our industry and a profound difference on public health. But the vast majority of professionals in our industry do not present with the most professional image. And I've talked about this before, but again, I'm going to keep talking about it until it changes. Everything that we do in our industry if we want to become part of healthcare and public health, has to align with the way public health and healthcare think, look, talk, and act. It just has to happen. We have to do those things. And so when I talk about professionalism, I'm going to talk about it first on a very basic level, the way we dress. Like, how are we dressing when we're working with our clients? Are we in shorts and a t-shirt and Crocs? Are we wearing a ball cap backwards? Do we got whistles and gold chains and stopwatches hanging around our neck? What do we look like? First impressions are absolutely everything when it comes to a field that we're not a part of the conversation in. And if we don't look the part, if we don't start dressing more professional, it's going to be really, really hard to get into those conversations. And the reason I bring up the way we look is because it is such a simple fix to make. But again, it goes back to that elemental component of this discussion, which is the first thing I talked about, which is broadening our perspective. As soon as you realize you're part of healthcare or public health, everything changes, including the way you look. Now, moving on to professionalism, certainly part of professionalism is, education, right? I mean, a professional becomes educated on their craft, but a professional does more than that. A professional advocates for their craft. So a professional talks to people in other professions about what they're doing. That person might write, they might public speak, and they might do a podcast like this. But true professionals do more than just work in the profession. They work on advancing the profession. And everyone has different skills, gifts, abilities, time, and talent. So I don't know what the right answer is for everyone out there. But part of being a professional is trying to enhance the standing of the profession overall. And that means different things to different people. But I strongly encourage everyone to say, what are you doing to enhance the profession, and what could you be doing, and take action on one or two things. If everyone listening took actions on one or two things, and then the people that they knew in our industry took actions on one or two things, that would result in a landslide of actions being taken in our industry that I actually can think will make a substantive difference long term. And the last thing I'll talk about in terms of professionalism is, professionals hold other professionals accountable. And I think this is something that we rarely talk about, but we need to do. I believe the people that are listening to this podcast are evidence-based professionals that are interested in serving the other 80%. And the only way we're going to get there is if the industry as a whole starts to consider how we move in that direction. So I think this is a call to action for those of you that are listening and your like-minded colleagues to hold your other peers accountable to these professional standards and have the difficult conversations about, what are you doing to further your education? What imagery you're putting out there? What messaging are you putting out there? How are you carrying yourself? How are you dressing? How are you grooming when you come to work? And I realize those are difficult conversations, but if we are going to really effectuate a significant change here, it can't just be from the top-down level. There's amazing work going on a policy level that we'll talk about in future podcast episodes that I think are really going to move the needle on this conversation we're having. But right now, it's at the grassroots, bottom-up level. So we need to be holding each other accountable to a higher standard. And that goes with everything. The one thing that really gives me pause when I see it, and I think is a great opportunity to hold people accountable, is what people are posting on social media. The forward-facing image and message of our industry is on social media, and seeing people post things that are out of alignment with evidence-based practices, seeing people post things that would suggest some degree of inappropriate imagery for the populations that we're looking to work with, this other 80%, we need to be having conversations with those individuals. And they need not be accusatory conversations. They need not be inflammatory conversations. But if you see somebody posting something on social media that you think is divisive or subversive for where our industry needs to be going long term, a simple direct message or an email reach out with a degree of curiosity around what somebody posted can be a highly beneficial thing to start to have a conversation at the grassroots level as to the implications of some of the things that people are talking about. So I don't care if that's a non-evidence-based practice with regard to exercise and nutrition, or maybe it's just the imagery that they're using. Maybe it's the fitness professional doing some kind of crazy exercise, with their shirt off outside on a beach. Although that might look like a Instagram worthy type of a post, the problem is it sends the message to that other 80% of the population that, wow, this person that's making this post, they're definitely not me. They don't get me. And man, that's not me. I can never imagine working with that person. And then it's not a very big jump for that person to make to say, and you know what? Not only can I not imagine ever working with that person, but I never want to have anything to do with the fitness industry because that's quote unquote not for me. How many times have those of you listening heard somebody say fitness or exercise is not for me? Well, the reality is we know it's for everyone, but when our imagery and our messaging suggest that it is very exclusive, we're never going to get the population writ large to think in a way that aligns with it being about them. So we need to become more credible. We have to. And then the last thing is we have to collaborate across sectors. And we're fighting an uphill battle in this country with regard to physical activity and movement. We've engineered a lot of it out of our life. I mean, the current statistics will suggest that a little less than 50% of the American population meets the CDC's guidelines for just general physical activity, and less than 25% of the population meets the requirements for both general aerobic activity and muscle strengthening. So we're fighting an uphill battle just because of the nature of contemporary society. And all of the sectors that are associated with physical activity need to be speaking with one unified voice and one unified message. Right now, we're kind of all saying slightly different things in our own echo chambers, and the message is not amplified enough. So my last pillar here, my last call to action for all of you is to figure out how you can collaborate across physical activity sectors. And I'll give a great example that we've done here in the state of Michigan. We've developed this Michigan Moves Coalition. And the Michigan Moves Coalition is the Fitness Club Association, the Parks and Rec, the Physical Educators, the Physical Therapy Association, some other groups that are associated with physical activity in the state. We're working on getting the healthcare providers involved. We had one health insurer, Priority Health, involved. We're looking to get more health insurers involved. So we're starting to collaborate across sectors to have one unified message to all the variety of stakeholders that we're messaging to, that physical activity and exercise is essential, important, and it's actually part of healthcare. Now, if we could start to collaborate effectively, if we could start to develop these cross-sector partnerships, we will amplify our message and we will become more credible as an industry as a result of it, because professionals collaborate with professionals in other sectors. It's the nature of a professional workforce, is there's cross-sector collaboration. And if we can really start to do this, and we can really start to amplify our voice by this cross-sector collaboration and unify our message, then we start to get the attention of government. We start to get the attention of public health. We start to get the attention of healthcare, because we're not just looked at as being on an island that only helps the fit get fitter. We're now looked at as a part of this larger physical activity coalition that is happening in a state or even the country. And again, the Physical Activity Alliance is doing a lot of work to support these kind of collaborations. But ultimately, where the rubber meets the road is where all of you are at. In your communities, you know people who are in Parks and Rec, you know people who work in physical education, you know physical therapists. How can we come together? How can we develop this cross-sector collaboration? It is such a critical aspect of being a part of conversations like the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. So to bring this all to a close, I think it should concern all of us greatly that there was a conference convened on how to make this nation healthier, and there was a pillar on physical activity, and we weren't mentioned once. We weren't even close to being mentioned once if you look at the language in the document. So that should be such an eye opener for us that while we've came so far in the past 2 or 3 years, we have so much further to go. But there's a path to get there. I am very bullish and optimistic that we can get there, but it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a top-down policy approach, and it's going to take a bottom-up grassroots advocacy approach. We have to broaden our perspective to realize that we are part of healthcare and public health. And when we do that, everything changes. We realize we have to become more credible in our messaging, in our imagery, in our education, in our professional standards, how we hold people accountable to those standards. And we have to start to get out of our silo, reach cross-sector to other physical activity stakeholders and say, we need a unified message, we need a unified cause, we need a unified voice. And if we do this together, a rising tide will raise all ships. If there's a conference at the White House in a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, or 10 years from now, our industry should not only have a seat at that table, but it needs to be a prominent seat. We have the resources, we have the passion, we have the professionals, we have everything we need to be a part of this conversation and a part of the population health solution in this country. But it's never going to happen if things don't change. Einstein said you can't solve a problem on the level the problem was created. Well, healthcare has been trying to solve the problem on the level that it was created a long time ago, and it's not working for the health of our nation. Our industry is trying to expand, looking at things through a very narrow lens of how we make people who are fitter. We have to broaden our perspective. The opportunity is here right now. I've said this before, coming out of COVID, this is the first time that chronic diseases led to acute mortality. I'll say that again. This is the first time that chronic diseases such as diabetes led to acute mortality. Before, if you had diabetes, you probably were going to die from some complication associated with it, but it was going to be 20 years down the line. During COVID, if you had diabetes, it meant you could die today. And that was a significant perspective shift for so many people. The opportunity is here right now. I've quoted Winston Churchill more often during the past couple of years than I probably ever will during my entire life. And as Winston Churchill said, we cannot waste a good crisis. Now is the opportunity. And we can be and should be a part of these conversations, but we have to take action. Additional information from this episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 75. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.